This is Dr. Sam Sugar, and we are recording today yet another AAAPG victim video. And on this conference, we have Carolyn Makovi. Carolyn, please introduce yourself.
Well, as you said, my name is Carolyn Makovi. I have been a widow now since July 2017. My husband had dementia of the Alzheimer's type, and he had entered the stage where you're paranoid and you start thinking people are hurting you, and he got himself involved with Adult Protective Services, who took him away from me without a court order, asked for a police investigation, which found that the allegation of abuse was unfounded, and nevertheless, they proceeded to keep him away from me until his death.
So this is one of those situations where Adult Protective Services became the primary agent of absconding an individual from his family. How did Adult Protective Services become involved with this?
One evening, one of my adult sons was sitting with my husband, and my husband would get very agitated and say, I need my dinner, I need my dinner. And my son said, well, why don't you go sit and watch television with mom and I'll get your dinner going. I can't get your dinner going if you won't just go and sit down and relax. And he said, I'm going to kill somebody. And he stomped out of the room. So my son ran and tried to be sure he didn't do something stupid. And the next thing we know, my husband was very, very adversarial when he got that way. And they struggled over the phone because he said, I'm going to call 911. And he ended up doing so. And he told the police that he'd been assaulted, and the police they declined. They spoke to my son. They declined to arrest him. They declined to charge him. They said, we understand about Alzheimer's. The one cop said, my grandmother has it. I understand this stuff. And but my husband said, I want to go to the hospital. He goes there. They say to him, what on earth happened to you? He says, I was assaulted. And they called APS.
Now, did he have any signs of abuse?
No, at the time he went, because of his struggle, he was bleeding. He had cut his head. He used to bleed a lot anyway. He was often bruising himself and cutting himself. He would run into tree branches trying to go out to his car before we stopped him from driving. But other than that, there were no signs of abuse. He had some injuries, but no signs of abuse. And yeah.
So APS took these signs of what was a normal life for him as evidence, without any hearing and without any adjudication, that he was an abused individual. What happened thereafter?
What happened thereafter is that the social worker came, talked to me, and declared that he could stay in the hospital until she decided what to do with him. The hospital said he can be released, and she said no. I said to her, I want to bring him home. She said no. I said, if you won't let him come home to me, let him go to the assisted living home where I already know he's going to go when the time comes, which in my mind isn't yet, because his mother had been there. My mother was going to be there, except she died first. And the social worker said, no, I want him to go to a nursing home. I said, he doesn't need to go to a nursing home. The hospital said he cannot go to a nursing home. He does not need to be in one. He functions much too high. And she said, if you won't let him go to a nursing home, I won't let him leave the hospital. And furthermore, I will try to seek guardianship if you won't do as I say. She said, I have clout. I can make people do what I want. And she kept him there for 5 weeks. And long after the police had said unfounded the allegation. And she continued just to neglect him, ignore him, and not let him out. And finally, I got him out when she lied to me about how to get a Medicaid waiver, for which he did not qualify and never would have qualified. She said, if you put him in a nursing home, he'll get Medicaid, and which I found out was a total lie. Her boss told me the same thing, and her boss said, I have no idea where that came from. The boss's boss eventually said, you may bring your husband home, but he died before I could do that.
What was the cause of death?
He choked on his breakfast. She did finally allow him to leave to go to an assisted living home, and he choked on his breakfast.
Now, why do you think there was such a push to A, keep him in the hospital, presumably while Medicare paid for it, and B, to put him in this particular home that she was agitating for? What was the motivation, do you think?
I have my own opinion. I actually called the Attorney General's office and said I suspected that there was a conspiracy to commit Medicaid fraud, because otherwise there was no benefit. There was certainly no benefit to my husband. There was no benefit to me. The only people I could think of who could benefit would be the social worker, her boss, any other social workers in their department who might get funding if they, apparently there's a big push to get people into nursing homes, and a little bit of this happens, so I'm told. I just couldn't think of anything else other than that and the fact that she likes to exert control. Again, the I have clout thing.
Now, did a guardianship take place?
It did not. It did not. In fact, I found in the hospital record where she says, okay, as long as you're going to let him go to assisted living, we will not pursue guardianship. She actually did redact her record. She put in her APS record that she had pushed for me to put him in an assisted living home and that I had refused. The truth is, I pleaded with her to let him go, and she said no.
So this brings up the question about records that are falsified in these proceedings. Talk to me about that.
First of all, of course, I'm not allowed to see the whole thing, and it was redacted anyway, so far as that what I was going to get to see. But as I read the APS report, I could see that it was filled with lies. Well, for one thing, it was really almost funny. She did not do a home visit. She put in there that the reason is that she was afraid for her own safety because of my violent son. Well, it's called a police escort. Anyway, and I actually did also ask the State Board of Social Work Examiners to look into a complaint that I filed with them. And they couldn't tell me the outcome, but one of the things the investigator asked me was, well, didn't she do a home visit? I said no. And but I could see in there, for example, like I said, where she says that, she says a lot of things, no, I don't know about if there's food in the house or if the house is clean. I didn't do a home visit, but I know they don't have pets. We have a lot of pets. Anyway, but she did say that she had pushed for me to put him into assisted living and that I had refused. And the truth is, she would not let him go to assisted living, and that is why he stayed in the hospital for 5 weeks. He lives there.
So let me ask you this. During the 5 weeks, which is a very, very long hospitalization, who paid for that hospitalization?
My insurance paid for it up to such a point. After about 3 weeks, they said, we're not paying anymore because there is no discharge plan. There's no discharge plan, so we're not paying anymore. So the hospital ate it. The hospital simply ate it.
That's really quite amazing that the hospital would let that happen, because they work on small margins, although they make a fortune. So was there ever a day in court?
Never, never.
So how were all these decisions about your husband, who admittedly was ill? Did anyone supervise the person? I presume it was just one social worker, correct?
Yes. What she told me is that they actually all work together as a team. So they all get together with each other. They're back at the office and talk about each other's cases and say, what do you think we should do? But her supervisor was in on all of that. In fact, I called her at one point and said, my husband's been in the hospital for 2 weeks. When are you going to let him out? And she said, oh, 2 weeks isn't that long of a time. I know you think it is, but it isn't really.
During this whole period of time, did you ever meet with a management team or a care plan coordinator or anyone else?
Never. He had a case manager in the hospital, and all they would ever tell me is, we're waiting for APS. We're waiting for APS. I said, when are you going to let my husband out of there? We're waiting for APS. What are you waiting for them to do? We're waiting for them to choose a facility. I said, I'm his wife. I get to choose a facility. They said, all we know is we're waiting for them.
So what do you think was actually going on there?
I think what was going on is that we have a lot of people who think that APS is God and that they have to do what APS tells them to do. I actually had a meeting with a customer service person only several months ago over at the hospital. And I said, you know, I've been doing some reading about this whole kind of thing. And I even found a quote on a website about this whole type of deal. And I said, I want you to see this. It says a hospital cannot be forced to keep a person in the hospital if Child Protective Services or Adult Protective Services says so, but they don't have a court order. I said, you all never had a court order. And yet everyone just said, well, APS, we have to do what they say. They felt they didn't need a court order. All they need is for APS, otherwise known as God, to come in and say, you shall do this. And they quiver in their boots and do it. Even the lady, she's a dear friend who eventually took care of my husband. She thought she had to do whatever APS said without a court order.
Now, did you ever see reports from APS?
In the end, I did, yes. I asked for it. And in fact, they gave me a little bit of a runaround. The lawyer for APS said, well, we have to see if you're allowed to have the report because we know you've hired a lawyer. And basically what they all say is, in order to get information, you have to hire a lawyer. Then when you hire a lawyer, they say, well, now you're being adversarial. Now we can't help you. But she did contact me back, and she said, we've had a big talk over here. We've determined that you have not given up your rights by hiring a lawyer. We are going to give you the report.
And how many reports were there over this 5 or 6 week period?
There's that APS report.
That's the initial one?
That's when she finally closed the case. I got a hold of that. The hospital report is 4 reams of paper long. Now, a lot of it is repetition because there's a lot of, today we gave him these medications, da-da-da. Then tomorrow it's going to say, 2 days ago we gave him this, yesterday this, today this, and then the next day. So it's like that. But basically we have 4 reams of paper.
And do they give a justification for their actions?
Basically it was that APS won't let him out. The hospital says he's in here. And in fact, I spoke to a case manager at the hospital, and she said she will not let him out. She keeps trying to force us to put him in a nursing home. And we keep telling her he cannot go. And in fact, she lied to me, the APS worker, because after 4 weeks, I said, I learned about a Medicaid waiver. My husband will never qualify. Let him out. She said, well, hasn't the hospital given you a list of nursing homes that you can go check out and see? She was lying because she knew, because I was told afterwards that they called her every other day for 4 weeks to say, let this man out of here. And she said, no, not unless you let him go to a nursing home. They said he can't go to a nursing home. And she said, well, then you can keep him.
So it's the usual videos that we do in this series have to do with guardianship and what goes on in court. But what you're telling our viewers today is that it doesn't even have to involve a court, in that there is an industry out there that preys on individuals for the purpose of their own aggrandizement and profit that is separate and independent from the courts as well. So what is a person, in your mind, what is a person to do if they're concerned about the welfare of another elderly person? Would you tell them to call APS?
I would most certainly tell them never to call APS. I would tell them to avoid APS like the plague, because their mindset is that if you need assistance, then that means you are totally incompetent and incapable of caring for your loved one, and they have to come in and take control. They have to take your loved one away. They have to try to get control of their money and then tell you what to do, and you get to pay for it.
What was there an actual seizure of accounts of money?
No, there was not. I was becoming afraid that there would be, but it didn't happen. But she was aware of how much he had because she asked him, this incompetent man who is incapable of stating that he didn't want her services. See, supposedly APS will say to the alleged victim, do you want me to help you? And the person has the right to say, no, I don't need you. She wrote in her report that my husband lacked the capacity to understand whether or not he needed her help. But 3 months later, he suddenly had the capacity to sign a form for her, giving her authorization to take hold of his medical records.
That is an amazing thing that we've heard over and over again, because capacity is such a fluid term. Here, a social worker decides that she's going to be judge, jury, and executioner. She'll decide without a hearing. She'll decide without an examination. She'll decide without hearing evidence whether somebody is or is not incapacitated. And if it suits her purpose, the person will be then capacitated. This is a tremendously complicated and evil concept. And anybody watching this can understand immediately the unbridled power that comes with that. You can take over a person's life, and it's bad enough when it happens in guardianship court. But to even have it happen before anybody else has a chance to even investigate it is a new low as far as I can tell. Do you think this is something that goes on a lot?
I'm certain that it does. I have no doubt. I have absolutely no doubt at all. I've read lots and lots of stories on the internet about children. APS is simply the other side of the coin as Child Protective Services, or CPS. And the same kind of stuff goes on with both vulnerable adults and with children. I think these people are power hungry. And I also think that they need to gather bodies because they get their funding from the government. And if they don't spend as much money this year as they did last year, then their budget is going to be cut. And so in order to keep getting their money that they think they need, I mean, you or I might think, hey, I didn't need that much money this year. My water heater didn't go up or whatever. So great, I'm spending less money. These folks don't think that way. So they're going to make it up as they go. If they can't find abuse, they're going to make it up. And they're also about control. Lord Acton said that absolute power corrupts absolutely. And these people are, well, they're hungry on power. And it just feeds on itself. And
did you have an opportunity to make a complaint?
I did. I contacted the State Board of Social Work Examiners, and I filed a complaint against the social worker and her boss and her boss. And the second boss actually was very nice. I had a very nice conversation with him, but I told him, you know, I filed the complaint against you because you are the supervisor of those two, and that means you're responsible for what goes on. He was the one who said to me, go ahead.
And what happened with those complaints?
They were heard and they voted, the board did, and they made a decision, and I'm not allowed to know because it's a personnel matter. So even though my taxes go to pay those people's salaries, and even though supposedly they answer to people like me, I don't get to know what was done.
You know, this story just underscores the fact that in this country today, it is a very dangerous thing to get old. And it is a very dangerous thing to need any kind of assistance from law enforcement, the courts, or lawyers, and now we can include social workers who apparently in some places exceed their authority and decide on their own whether somebody's capacitated or not. Carolyn, thank you very much. We appreciate this very much, and good luck to you.
Thank you, Dr. Sugar.